probably since Where the Wild Things Are, where I felt like the special effects in that movie so perfectly suited the movie. There are scenes in this movie, especially with Joey Gordon-Levitt. You've seen the clips in the trailers where he's flying around, and people were saying, how are they going to be able to explain any of this? It's just going to be a dream. Everything
is explained pretty much.
I mean, it's like comic book logic. Like, you might be able to find holes in it. I couldn't really find any. But that entire sequence of Joey Gordon-Levitt fighting in the hallway, and when you realize what is actually happening in that scene, where he's in this world and they're in this world, and you know exactly what is going on, but it's just stakes stacked on top of stakes, and more stakes and more stakes, and then Leonardo DiCaprio's history comes into play, and there's a nice love story at the start of this movie that I think ends up grounding the movie. Even if you don't totally grasp what's going on a lot of the movie, there's an emotional core to this movie. And I think even if this movie confuses you a little bit, which I definitely was. I won't lie. There were times I'm like, I'm kind of confused. But I totally feel like I was in safe hands. And even though I didn't necessarily know everything that was going on, I know it makes sense, because Christopher Nolan is a director who, the guy knows his shit.
And I think too, the amazing thing about Inception, which I mean, it's a film that's been marketed to the point where, I mean, you and I were talking about how people were picking apart the first trailer and was like, well, this doesn't make sense. But it's so crazy because all of it does. And I was just gonna say, we're talking about the dialogue that's setting up everything. I never once felt, and I feel like in a lot of movies we talk about expository dialogue. Last week I was talking about how the backstory in Predators, I was like, I don't care about this. Like, this is boring. Everything is thoroughly interesting, and I think one of the reasons it is because Inception touches on something that we all do, which is dream. And I think the logic that goes behind it, I mean, there's lines that Leonardo DiCaprio says where he says, you never actually realize you're dreaming until you wake up. And the logic about, you know how you know you're in a dream when you don't know how you got to the location. When you got there, which I was like, oh, like I didn't even, it's like when they meet Cillian Murphy in a bar, he's like, how did you get to this bar? And he's like, well, and then he starts to realize he can't remember. I think that's fantastic. I mean, we're talking about the action sequences in this film are some of the best. Like, I know this, I'm gonna say some pretty outlandish things right now, but it's probably some of the best action sequences I've seen in a really long time, possibly I've ever seen, because you're talking about the Joey Gordon-Levitt scenes, and there's literally scenes where he's floating in zero gravity, and it looks like it looks like he's in space.
There's no gravity, and it's like, how is this being executed? It is a movie that genuinely made me think and made me excited.
People were ripping up, there's the one that you always see in the trailer with Joey Gordon-Levitt fighting the guy in the long hallway as he's falling to the different sides of the walls. People ripped up in applause at the end of that, and it's because it's so well shot. You are not going to see people ripping up in applause at the end of a sequence from A-Team or things like that.
It's well shot, but even more important than that, because you're invested in it. You're invested in these characters.
And we haven't even really mentioned, I think, I was talking about The Kids Are Alright, and I didn't really want to say it. I had it in my head, though. The cast in this movie, I mean, alone, just the names are fantastic, but each person is so good to me. Leonardo DiCaprio, as always, is super good. It's a very similar performance, I think, that he kind of gives in Shutter Island a little bit.
I think it's better here.
I think so as well.
And I think this movie is so far superior to Shutter Island.
Without a doubt for me as well. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt is pretty fantastic. Tom Hardy, who plays Ames, who's kind of the shapeshifter of the movie, who just can become anybody.
He was in Bronson. He
steals the show in this film.
And I sat there the entire movie like, who is this guy? I didn't even recognize him. I just watched Bronson literally probably 3 weeks ago. And he was the only part of that movie that I totally dug. I was like, he was fantastic. He practically walked away with it for me. I was like, he is damn good.
Yes, and I think one of the reasons, for me at least, that Inception is a 2.5 hour long movie that doesn't feel 2.5 hours. And I've mentioned to you the other movie that I would compare it to, not because they're similar, but because as far as the way I felt during the film, is Magnolia, which is a film that's 3 hours and 8 minutes long that doesn't feel 3 hours and 8 minutes long. And I think it's because Inception, the storytelling behind it is so fluid. Everything just seems to fall into place, and I was never once like, well, this scene's not necessary. You could take this out and it would be totally fine. Everything felt so necessary to me, and I think by the end of this movie, not only do you have an amazing action film, an amazing like sci-fi type of a thriller. I mean, people have been comparing this to like The Matrix and 2001: A Space Odyssey, which rightfully so. I see where they're borrowing those, where they may be getting some inspiration for some of the things, but I think it's a wholly original film all on its own. I think by the last 5 to 10 minutes of this film, Christopher Nolan does what I think some of his best films have really done. I mean, I love The Dark Knight, but I think I like Memento more than The Dark Knight.
Yeah, I mean...
And I think by the end of Inception, you start to think, about the film as to what is reality, what is a dream, and like even to yourself, like what is reality to you? I mean, reality is whatever we perceive it to be, not to be all, I sound like a hippie, like reality is what we perceive it to be, man. But like, I think it ends on the perfect shot. I remember just watching it and being like, please don't go too long. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I remember being like, if it actually shows the outcome of what's going on screen, I'm going to be like, no, like you shouldn't. And it ends at the perfect moment. I think it's one of the best movies I've seen all year. Go see it.
Christopher Nolan, he's the second you compare him to another director, I think you're shortchanging him, because he is...
It's brilliant.
This is it is pretty brilliant, and I think no one else could ever make this movie. It's like no one else could have made Avatar, but, you know, someone could. Well, except because the story was so weak. Exactly, it's just the money thing. But Christopher Nolan is the only guy who has enough clout coming off The Dark Knight, and the only guy who has the fucking balls to really do a movie like this, to follow up The Dark Knight, one of the most successful films ever made, with a total mindfuck, with a total movie that maybe doesn't make sense on a lot of levels. Like, it just takes place in dreams. We talked about A Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, you can do anything. You can set up your own laws. You can take it as far as you want. And Nolan does that. The sequences that are in Paris with Ellen Page and Leonardo DiCaprio, when the city is folding on top of itself, and they're walking up walls, and it's the street now. It's just genius. It's like it's the stuff dreams are made of. It just makes you. It just makes me so excited, and these are the movies I wait for as a movie fan.
Is it one of the best movies of the year for you?
It's definitely in my top 5 for sure. It's probably in the top 3 and definitely in contention for my top spot. But I was blown away.
I usually don't like. I realized after certain sequences that my jaw, I was like, haha. I was like, oh, pick up your jaw, Aaron.
It's so suspenseful, I was tired.
And I think that's what's great about it. I think so many filmmakers are concerned with having these big budget action movies. Like, I mean, we harp and bag on Transformers so much, and it's like that type of movie is whatever, it's colorful, there's explosions, there's action sequences, but none of it is actually that engaging or that intelligently done. I think we're at 6 minutes. I think we're okay.
Perfect, yeah.
But I think that Inception, Christopher Nolan, we trust him enough and he trusts us enough that we are going to stick with the movie and be as engaged as he wants us to be with it, as thinking about it as much as he actually wants us to.
He's one of the few directors who's a big budget director, big blockbuster director.
I think it cost $160 million.
And I still consider him as much of an artist as he was when he was making Following or Memento. And I think this movie, I feel like, fits better with Memento and Following and those early movies,
Prestige almost,
than it does with kind of the Batman stuff. And it's just so great to see him bounce back and forth between being a superhero director and doing whatever the hell he wants. I can't say enough about him.
Go see it. Stop listening to this and go see it.
Go see it. Is that all we got, Aaron?
I think
that is our episode. NitPicket.com. Episode number 75. Head over to the website. You'll find links to iTunes where you can rate and subscribe to the show. Write a review.
Do it.
If you have a second, contact@nitpicket.com is the email. 866-808-0222 is the voicemail line. Please call us, tell us your thoughts on The Kids Are Alright, Inception, if you agree or disagree, especially if you disagree. We always love to hear.
I would love to know your thoughts on Inception.
We always love to hear the opposition. What's coming out next week? Who gives a shit?
I feel so bad. I think it's, I believe, Salt with Angelina Jolie is coming out. I could be totally wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's coming out next week. I don't really know what else is coming out, to be honest. I almost don't.
Doesn't matter.
Whatevs.
You guys, for nitpicket.com, I'm Leland.
And I am Aaron.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Peace!